So when you're brewing beer, one of the key things that people hear about is ales versus lagers. I think the popular perception that people will say, I like lagers or I like ales. And I think that's because in the mass market, lagers are typically like relatively light colored beers. The one that I had but have now finished, it was a lager, so it was that light color. People can go back to the beginning of the episode to see when I had a full glass. And then ales are often on like grocery store shelves and in beer store shelves, like a darker color, and maybe they have a bit of a richer flavor, a sweeter flavor. So I think people think in their heads that that's what the difference is. But my understanding, and I've never brewed a beer in my life, but lager versus ale, it's really just to do with one of them is top fermenting, the other one's bottom fermenting, and I can never remember which is which. But um, you could actually, and correct me if I'm wrong, but can you basically get any kind of flavor out of a lager or an ale, or these kinds of distinctions of lagers being light, ales being dark? That's kind of like that's an oversimplification, right?
I think it depends. So, your macro lager, super clean, super light. It's pretty much got like zero sugar left because the yeast have pretty much eaten everything because they added in it. Most of these places, these macro lagers, which we make these style lagers too, based on one of these models I made, but I'll talk about that later. They're super clean, easy drinking, no phenolic off flavor, no weird esters or flavors, super clean. And the reason they're clean is because of Saccharomyces pastorianus. And pastorianus is very efficient at fermenting at cold temperatures. And the reason Pastorianus is very good at fermenting cold temperatures is because you have Saccharomyces eubayanus, so S. eubayanus, and then you have Saccharomyces cerevisiae, which is your ale strain. These two, at some point, they made a hybrid. So they mated, and it must have been a really harsh environment, and then it sporulated, and they created this new offspring called Saccharomyces pastorianus. So pastorianus that everyone uses is actually a hybrid strain. So what it did is it got its cold fermenting tolerance from its eubayanus parent, and then it got its maltotriose complex sugar ability to metabolize from its cerevisiae parent. You combine those two, and you have a very efficient machine at low temperatures. And because it's at lower temperatures, it's going to be a lot cleaner, not a ton of flavors and esters going on. I like to explain that, like, the reason ales have more esters and flavors is it's kind of like an equivalent of if you're moving furniture and it's like 80 degrees or 100 degrees in your house, you're going to be sweating a lot. And the sweat, like the sweat equivalent is like the esters and flavors.
Gotcha. That's super interesting. Okay, so the lager yeast, which you pronounced it there. I'm not going to. I would just completely butcher it. But the lager yeast. Say it again.
Pastorianus.
Pastorianus.
Yeah.
It is able to ferment at very cold temperatures. Which, using this analogy, that's going to help me now remember that it's a really clean flavor because it's like so using Fahrenheit, which half of our listeners are in the U.S., so that'll make sense to half of our listeners. In Fahrenheit temperatures, when it's like 40 degrees, 50 degrees, it's a pretty cool day. That's about 5 degrees or 10 degrees Celsius. And at those kinds of temperatures, if you were to do a bunch of moving furniture around from one apartment to another or whatever, you wouldn't get very sweaty. And so that's kind of what's happening with these Pastorialis, this lager yeast, it's getting at low temperatures, it's able to do a lot of work efficiently, converting the sugars in the wort into alcohol and into carbon dioxide, giving beer its alcohol and fizziness, respectively. Um, and so, yeah, so you're typically getting with lagers a nice clean flavor. So, yeah, so you're completely ruining my hypothesis around lagers and ales not necessarily having different kinds of flavors. But then ales, on the other hand, it's like moving on a very hot day, moving the furniture on a hot day. So, if you're talking about like an 80 or 100-degree Fahrenheit day, that's like a 30-degree Celsius day. Very hot outside, you're getting really sweaty. So similarly, the yeast they're just shedding all kinds of interesting flavors into the beer and
Yep.
giving ales, which I tend to prefer, their yummy flavors in my view.
Now think about this too. When you're in a hotter environment, you're able to move around a little quicker and get stuff
Mm.
done faster.
The joints are
Same
all
thing.
lubricated.
Yeah. So lagers are a little slower in most cases than ales can be. And then you also have to think about, okay, just like humans, some humans are just predisposed to sweat more, even if it's like, 1 degree outside. You know what I mean? So some of these other strains, these cold tolerant strains, will still impart esters and flavors reminiscent of an ale strain. So Eubionus, which is the parent of Pastorianus, tends to have they call it phenolic off flavor, just because it naturally expresses it due to its nature. So that's where it gets kind of confusing. I'm not going to dive deep into this right now, but yeah. So in a general idea, that's like the best metaphor I can really figure out for the
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
understanding of this.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I've definitely learned a bunch there. I've been misinforming people about lagers and ales. But one of them is top fermenting and the other is bottom fermenting, right?
Yeah,
That is the
I'm trying to think. The only reason one is considered top fermenting is because there's a really thick rosin in ales, because all the cells they're flying all over the place, and it tends to foam up at the top.
so crossin is like a foamy layer on the top of the wort as
Exactly,
it's
yeah,
brewing.
and
Yeah.
that's mostly cells up there, which is true. But lager strains, they don't just like sit on the bottom.
Oh,
They're all over the place, but they don't make like a big thick rosin like ales do.
I see. I see. So it's a visual thing. So
Exactly,
people
yeah.
call ales top fermenting because you're seeing all this on the top, all these cells bouncing
Yep.
around. Gotcha. But it's an oversimplification to call ales top brewing and lagers bottom brewing. Cool.